Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another ShareWise webinar. Today, I've got the pleasure to have a great conversation with Luke Reid, the CEO of Microba Life Sciences, MAP on the ASX. You know, there's a lot of exciting things going on behind the scenes that Luke and I have had a little bit of a quick chat about, but he wants to have a bit of a chat to shareholders and anyone out there that is interested. My name's Harry McCaskill, one of the senior advisors here at ShareWise. And Luke, I just want to thank you for your time being here out of your busy schedule to give us a little bit more insight.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me, Harry.
Excellent. Well, the structure, what we'll do, make it a little bit more interactive for everyone out there, everyone there watching and listening. A bit of a Q&A the whole time. You've got your key points you want to speak about. I've got a few questions, and anyone out there that is listening and watching, drop a few questions throughout, and Luke will be more than happy to answer them. But I guess to kick things off, Luke, why don't you introduce the business a little bit to anyone who might not know too much, and then we can get cracking with a few questions.
Thanks, Harry. We're all about the trillions of organisms that live in and on your body, known as your microbiome. And in particular, 95% of those reside in your gastrointestinal tract, in your gut. And that's where we're intensively focused. The founding vision was that those organisms are incredibly important for health and the development of disease, and science is continuously improving and proving that out. And that would lead to diagnostics and therapeutics. Those organisms, with their importance, ultimately we would be routinely measuring them in that diagnostic setting, and we would discover and open up the biology of those organisms to discover and develop novel drugs. But all of that was only possible first if you could very accurately and comprehensively measure that community of organisms to get to those diagnostic opportunities and find those novel therapeutics. And at Microba, we have the world-leading technology for doing just that. And so that's what we've been pursuing for the last 7 years. And excitingly, after a lot of hard work, we have those diagnostics and therapeutics in hand, and it's about execution from here.
Excellent. That's it's obviously been a long process in the making. 7 years, it's not a short amount of time. Tell me a little bit about the team behind the scenes that have been able to make this all come true and get you to the stage you're at, and I guess a little bit about your background.
Let's start with the co-founders, and I'll go to how I come in. So I'll talk about the founding story. So actually, I'll start with myself. So I am a scientist at heart, a PhD in molecular biology, but I was always most passionate about once we discover something in the laboratory, what do we do with that to ultimately create a product or service that's going to improve our lives? That's what's driven my career. So even before I finished my PhD, I was incredibly hungry to cut my teeth in that world of intellectual property intensive commercialization. And that's saw me working at probably the best institute that does that in Australia, which is an organization called UniQuest. There, they commercialize all of the technology out of the University of Queensland. So they did Gardasil and MRI technologies and a raft of really fantastic technologies that we've commercialized out of Australian universities. And it was there back in 2013 that I met the two co-founders of Microba, Professor Phil Hugenholtz and Professor Gene Tyson. These guys are rock stars in the very specific field of microbial genomics. So measuring and understanding microbes based on their genetic material. Right. They developed their careers largely spanning tenure in North America. So UC Berkeley, MIT, Phil was a director of the Joint Genome Institute. They got then attracted back to their roots in Australia to set up a centre for excellence in this space of microbial genomics, which they called the Australian Centre of Ecogenomics. They're in the top 1% of cited researchers globally, so incredibly highly regarded, not only in their field, but just in science in general.
Yep.
And so that's the caliber of the foundation of the company that led to us having a world-leading technology base and unfair advantage in pursuing these diagnostic and therapeutic endeavors in the microbiome. But then you layer on top of that the team that we've then assembled around it. Just to name a few, our head of therapeutics joined us from Amgen in California as we moved from preclinical into preclinical development of those assets. Our chief scientific officer was also one of the first to use this core type of technology that we were founded on, this genomics method called metagenomics. He's a internationally renowned expert in the application of artificial intelligence and machine learning methodologies to genomics. So an incredible asset in the work that we've been doing. And then spanning into the commercial side of the business, we have our head of growth and go-to-market, who his claim to fame and his biggest achievement for his career was that he led the team that built Freestyle Libre, the continuous glucose monitor, and commercialized that, which is a multi-billion-dollar product line for Abbott. And so an incredibly talented individual, Harvard, Wharton Business School. That's the caliber, just at the high level, of the type of people that we have in Microba.
How good. And I guess for you, what would you say your key role at the moment is? Obviously being CEO, what are you focusing on a day-to-day, to continue to grow the business and get it where it needs to be? Because again, a lot of shareholders look at management teams and they really try and understand, are they leading everyone in the right path? Do they all have the same philosophy? Are they all leading to one key goal? What would you say your key focus is at the moment?
Well, first, it's focus. And I just got off of an all hands presentation to the team, and the message has consistently been for months and months and quarters, focus. The art of saying no. In particular, the art of not only saying no, but making fast decisions. Speed is our superpower here in the size of the organization, and we need to leverage that every day, make faster and faster decisions. The focus of the organization is incredibly clear. We've got OKRs that we track regularly. Everyone in the organization is aligned and rowing in the same direction. We want to be the first to medicalize microbiome testing, established in standard of care with guidelines and ultimately reimbursed. And we want to also be one of the first to prove out and demonstrate that microbiome therapeutics can be effective in a chronic disease population. And if we achieve only a fraction of one of those endeavors, shareholders will be incredibly well rewarded.
Excellent. And I guess that's what they're holding the stock for, right?
Absolutely.
And to see that, that dream and that vision come to play. And again, it's not only a vision, you've got to have a strategy to get there. So, for you, what's your competitive advantage, and what are your strategies for the next year, 2 years, to make sure you can get that edge on the market and gain as much market share as possible?
So if we look at our diagnostics business, as I said, we had an unfair advantage from the start. And my view has been that unfair advantage and our ability to measure the organisms in your gut better than anyone else in the world, I'll be transparent. We won't hold that competitive advantage forever. I think we've got a significant competitive advantage there, but we won't hold it forever. At the end, we're measuring a biological truth, right? And so there'll be a range of methodologies to come at that. And so the philosophy has been internally, and the focus is we leverage that competitive advantage to be the first to actually use that to distill the diagnostic products and the therapeutic opportunities that we can see now that nobody else can see. We're going to be first to get to those, and we transfer our intellectual property value from that platform to the actual products that we developed out of it. And so our unfair advantage there is being first and doing the hard work at the forefront of that market to be the first to properly medicalize microbiome testing and establish that in standard of care in a very focused way, starting with solving the problem of people that have unresolved gastrointestinal issues. And the reason why we start there, because the microbiome interacts with a whole range of different states of health and disease, right?
Yep.
But we've got to be incredibly focused and solve one thing well first.
Yep.
And that is gastrointestinal disease. And the reason for that is, first, on a first principles basis, 95% of those organisms reside there in your gut. And so they're going to have their effect on the body first, locally within the gastrointestinal tract. The second component is that's where the most clinical literature lies today. And then by extension, that's where clinicians are therefore most ready to adopt. So we start there, and that is our first wedge into solving the medical application of microbiome test information before we can go into logical adjacencies. Like, everyone's excited about neurodegenerative disorders and the impact that we can potentially have there from the microbiome. General mental health, depression and anxiety, cardiovascular disease. There's so much opportunity. But focus. We start with gastrointestinal disease, and it's a huge market. And 50% of people are not getting a resolution with the standard of care today.
Is that that 50%? Is that because there's nothing really out there that can give them that help, or is it because it's too expensive? What are those limitations, and why do you think there is a big issue? Because if there's demand for a solution and you can be that solution, well, it's huge for you guys. But what's the issue, would you say?
They're missing the information to address the root cause of the problem.
Right.
So let's start with our product set on the diagnostic side to address that problem.
Yep.
If we start with, Harry comes to the doctor, has gastrointestinal symptoms that have been hanging around for a long time, and you're in significant pain. Maybe you've got pretty significant diarrhea. They're going to start with, is this a pathogen, yes or no? And the current tool that they have available to them will test circa 20 common pathogens. Right. And the problem with that is that only tests for less than 20% of the clinically known and relevant gastrointestinal pathogens that are in existence that could be infecting you.
Yep.
And so the first problem that we can logically solve by measuring very accurately all of those organisms is say, we can comprehensively answer that question for a clinician and patient on, is there a gastrointestinal pathogen, yes or no?
Yep.
And if yes, how do I selectively treat that? So what antibiotics in my arsenal can I actually deploy to that? We can be very prescriptive and help the clinician to guide their therapy. And so if you look at that at the start, 19% of people will get a diagnosis for a gastrointestinal pathogen with standard of care, just the 20 organism test.
Yep.
What we've shown today is that by applying our advanced gastrointestinal pathogen test, we will get an answer for an additional 20% of those people.
Right.
Then what the problem is you've only solved for around 40% of those people. What about the remaining 60%?
Yeah.
Well, there's no pathogenic cause from everything that we can see today. They end up in this bucket of a functional gastrointestinal disorder, and many of them lead to an irritable bowel syndrome diagnosis by exclusion and non-specific management. And those people rinse around in the healthcare system trying restrictive diets like low FODMAP. They try mental health interventions. They try all kinds of supplements and tinctures to anything that they can, because they are incredibly debilitated by these symptoms.
Right.
And all of the science today tells us that a large portion of that population and their symptoms is influenced by the microbiome and the functional health of the gastrointestinal tract. And so there's three dimensions to this. You've got, if you think about the gastrointestinal tract, you've got the structure and function and integrity of the gastrointestinal tract itself.
Yep.
You've got the organisms and the microbiome at the center and all of the things that they're producing and how they're interacting with the individual through the gastrointestinal tract.
Yep.
And you've got the mental health status of that individual and the signaling between the gut and the brain. And what we can solve for is the integrity of the gastrointestinal tract and the structure and function of the microbiome. And that's our second test, is a test that we call Meta Explore, which then can unpack all of that information for a clinician, but most importantly, show what can I do with that information to help the patient ultimately to get a resolution. And we've just put out in the annual report that it's around 30% of individuals that we can then impact with that test today. And that'll get more, that will increase through time.
Yeah.
So that's a significant chunk of that underserved patient population that doesn't have a solution today. They don't have the prescriptive, objective testing to actually identify root cause to a problem, to come back to, what's the deficiency in standard of care, but also the clear information on what do I do next as a clinician that will actually change that result for the individual.
So it's the information behind the scenes that just isn't, the technology hasn't been there, but you know, behind the scenes have got the capabilities to provide that to the market.
Yeah. And just to complete your first question, which is what's our competitive advantage? Now that's on the diagnostics business, right? We've also got our unfair advantage being applied to the discovery and development of novel drugs. So these organisms are essential in health and the development of chronic diseases. And we have our unfair advantage being able to see at a very detailed level the key organisms that we believe are involved in preserving health and, in absent, potentially lead to chronic diseases.
Yeah.
We see these organisms that are very prevalent and abundant within healthy people, but consistently absent or in very low abundance in people with a chronic disease. So the hypothesis being that they play some sort of critical role in that microbial community and the overall health of the individual. And you take that out and you set up with a range of other factors that might be genetic susceptibility, other diet or lifestyle factors, you set up for the chronic disease, right?
Yeah.
And what we've now shown is, well, if we take that organism, culture it for the first time and actually reintroduce that into a disease setting, can we actually influence the chronic disease of that individual? And the answer in a preclinical sense using animal models and other preclinical models is yes, it has a huge effect. The last question that we're driving towards is, can we show that efficacy in a patient?
Yeah.
But the basis and attraction of those drugs is they're discovered from naturally derived from healthy humans.
Yes.
So rather than a novel, potentially high-risk chemical entity or biologic, these are naturally occurring in healthy individuals. So you've already got a significant advantage there in terms of drug development.
Right. And I mean, I've got a question on my end as well, because you've got competitive advantage in both aspects of the business, but gut health, it's a major issue all across the globe, right? As a business that you're trying to come up with a solution to fix the issue once the gut disease is there, right? But are you promoting healthy eating or healthy diets to prevent the gut issue actually occurring, or is that are you stepping back from that and you're just more providing the solution to fix the issue once it's there?
It's both, but I would say more weighted to the latter in the first instance.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is that most people, unfortunately, as much as this pains everyone, wait until they have an issue and show up at a doctor, right?
Yeah.
And so increasingly people are proactively managing their health, and there's some great information about how you can have a healthy diet and how you can modulate that in a more personalized manner. But the real critical pain at the moment, if you think about vitamins and painkillers, the real painkiller that's required is the people that have debilitating symptoms. Yeah. And are entering it with the doctor. And we've got to solve that problem. And then I think, have the ability to come upstream and try to avoid a lot of those problems from occurring. And so we extensively focus on helping those people that are screaming out for a solution today.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So I guess there's only so much you can say or so much advice you can give to people in terms of what to eat and how active to be. And you can take a horse to water, you can't force it to drink it.
Well, importantly, you nailed it, Harry. Dietary change is hard, right? And so people know what they should do. They should not smoke, they should not drink, they should eat healthy, right? And there's a dearth of information out there about that. There's a wealth of information, sorry, I should say. Wealth of information out there on how to do that, and some great tools to help you do that, that's personalized for you. But the real motivating factor that can influence people to change their diet and change their habits is when they have a serious debilitating issue and they have prescriptive information on a test report that says this is why. And if you implement these recommendations and these therapies or diet or lifestyle changes from the doctor, all of the evidence would say that your symptoms will go away. That's motivating. They will do that in that setting in the vast majority of instances. The other thing which I think was underneath your question was, what are the tools that a clinician has today when they get a microbiome test result in that setting where he said, Harry's in the doctor's clinic with problems with one of our reports? What do they do? Are we just talking about, changing your diet at the end of the day and eating more fiber? No, the answer is very, very targeted and personalized to the individual. And it spans, yes, diet. Diet is one of the key tools, but it is prescriptive diet intervention to say, eat these specific things that will introduce these prebiotic components that will change and modulate that microbial community in the right way. The second component is, again, dietary change is hard. There are some nutritional supplement opportunities that can make that easier for people to implement into their diet. And then the final is there is prescriptive therapy as well in a number of instances. And so prescription and a small set of treatments. Obviously, we're then building the future set of treatments for our therapeutic division.
Excellent. And I guess from, you mentioned the yearly report the other day, just before, sorry, it came out the other day. If there was, a couple of key points from that you would like, everyone listening out there who might have seen that just yet, what were the key highlights on that financial year report? And I don't know, talk a little bit about the balance sheets or the revenue outlook moving forward, et cetera, et cetera. Any key highlights there?
The key headline is we grew over 120% in revenue. And that was underpinned by two things. The first is the growth of our underlying diagnostic testing. So that grew 50% year on year. And the second component was we accelerated our international expansion into the UK with a strategic acquisition there. And so adding that on top with a fantastic team and customer base there in the UK, which will then leverage a range of synergies on, that took us up to 12 million in revenue from a $5.7 million base. So a really fantastic year on the diagnostic side. And on the therapeutics, we completed a first-in-human phase 1 clinical trial for our lead candidate, MAP 315, targeting mild to moderate ulcerative colitis, and are now rocketing to set up for a phase 2. So that's a pretty good year. That's a huge amount of progress on both.
Sounds like a couple of big events and a couple of ticking the boxes along the way as well. So with that clinical 1 trial, that phase 1 clinical trial, that's done and dusted. What's the time frame and timeline on the phase 2 clinical trial and getting that started? And how many patients will be sort of trialed on the technology?
So in terms of the timeline, stay tuned on that, and we'll have more information out in the near term. But safe to say we are rocketing ahead to get IND ready for that phase 2. So CMC, all of the regulatory documentation and dossier, all of that work is very far advanced. To have the package to initiate that phase 2. With regards to the second point around the trial design and the number of patients, the key opportunity here for Microba is to be potentially the first or one of the first to demonstrate that a live microbiome therapeutic can have an impact in a chronic disease. And we're focused, again, gastrointestinal, starting as our start point, in inflammatory bowel disease, where there's some significant gaps in standard of care. And to do that, we need to have a well-powered study, but we can be really smart about how we design that. So in total, it's going to be about 200 patients. We might be able to get it down to around 160. And that is going to be broken into two parts. There's a first part, phase 1, where we'll get directional data and a key go, no-go decision point. So we want to be smart and we want to be very effective with the use of capital. Say, what's the lowest cost de-risking that we can do sensibly, where we'll have a clear go, no-go decision point. And then we'll go on to the larger portion of that trial. So that's the design. In total, 160 to 200, but a much smaller part for the first part of that phase 2.
Right. And I guess when it comes to phase 1 done and dusted, now you're moving on to phase 2. What are the costs associated with that? And sitting and looking back from your perspective, are you in a solid cash position so that there is no need for a dilutive capital raise in the future, or where are you currently sitting with that?
Yeah, so in a good cash position, Harry, over $20 million in the bank and a significant R&D tax claim about to come in of around $6 million. In terms of funding the therapeutics, an important part of our strategy, and we've been consistent on this, is Microba's never had a view or strategy that we are going to be a late-stage drug developer. We believe we have the core engine and competitive advantage that can lead us to discover and do the initial de-risking on these therapeutic assets. And then put them in the hands of big pharma to take them through late-stage development. And the question has always been, when is that appropriate de-risking point where we'll hand the baton over to big pharma and start to transact and get a return for shareholders? But importantly, also, share the risk and cost of the development of those assets. And that remains our strategy, is to identify those partnering points at the right point to risk share the cost, and get some return for shareholders. And we want to be really smart about the capital that we use off of our balance sheet and leverage non-dilutive funding opportunities everywhere possible. And we're continuing to pursue exactly that strategy on non-dilutive capital plus sensible partnering, which makes sure we balance the trade-off between how much of the pie you give away early and also sensible use of capital and risk sharing. So it's not a direct answer to your question, which I want to call out, but it's because we're working on a whole bunch of things diligently, as you can imagine, at the intersection of that. And we expect to have more information out shortly for shareholders. Yeah,
of course. I understand. I'm sure shareholders do as well. But, you mentioned, working with pharmaceutical companies and things like that. What is the process at the moment that you're in, making collaborations with other players in the same industry? Is there potential for a merger, or is there potential for takeover, or where do you, and what's your viewpoint, and where do you see yourself potentially doing anything like that?
I'll take it in two parts for diagnostics and therapeutics, because they're slightly different. On the diagnostic side, I think one of the key validating things that people that are new to the Microba story should pay attention to is, you don't just have to believe it from me that we have this unfair advantage in being the first to develop up this new category of standard of care through microbiome testing. We have, as a result, attracted two of the world's largest diagnostic companies who are backing us to do just that. SynLab, which is Europe's largest pathology company, and Sonic Healthcare, one of the largest and most trusted diagnostic companies in the world, and now the largest shareholder. So strategically invested in us, and we are commercializing our testing together, starting here in Australia, and then critically focused on our other key markets in the UK and US. So that's, clearly there is a future path and opportunity where there's a lot of appetite and interest on what Microba is doing. And people are putting a pulse on us to say, this is going to be potentially a major category in diagnostics. And they're putting an option on the future acquisition of that by staying very, 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 very close. But I would say our philosophy is there is so much opportunity that we have to unlock there. We're not, acquisition in the near term. No, we got so much value to unlock for shareholders being the first in this category. Yep. But clearly the interest is out there. And if if and when we receive offers like that, we would reasonably and diligently consider those on behalf and with shareholders.
Yeah.
On the therapeutic side, early partnering and risk sharing is key and in strategy. And the question is just at what time point is it appropriate to bring those partners in? We've had active dialogue, I would say, on those programs and assets for at least the last 3 or 4 years. And top pharma companies continue to track our progress regularly, like I would say on a quarterly basis. There's conversations. So stay tuned on that front as well. And we will continue to be diligent in striking that balance on the right time and risk sharing and use of capital as we look at those opportunities to partner on therapeutics.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. It is timing, right? If there's an opportunity but it's the wrong time, it's not going to work out, and it's trying to pinpoint that, take advantage of it when it suits. I guess there's risk involved in everything, right? So you don't want to just jump the gun too soon as well. So it's just waiting for the right time. Exactly.
Yeah, like just to put a fine point on that. If there was a deal that presented today, pre phase 2. We would reasonably consider that if the parameters were right. But if the parameters aren't right, there'd be way too much opportunity left on the table to not take it through to a phase 2 initial readout, at least from that first part, to have shareholders see the benefit of that next phase of really significant de-risking at a reasonable price. Key example, just to highlight the opportunity there, is the recent acquisition of Prometheus by Merck. So they had a novel biologic, not related to the microbiome, but a novel biologic for inflammatory bowel disease. So demonstrated phase 2 efficacy data and immediately had a bidding war on that asset. It was a 40-person company, and it was a circa $11 billion transaction. So the appetite in inflammatory bowel disease is significant. If you show phase 2 de-risking, even in a first part, it will be very valuable. So, but that doesn't also discount if the right opportunity was there before we initiated. Of course, we're going to reasonably consider that and think about that.
Yeah, I think the strategies in place that you've got. If something used to come in, obviously you're going to consider it and see if it continues to meet your the vision and the goals moving forward. And it'd be silly not to think about it at the very least.
Yeah, absolutely.
And now, one thing every shareholder looks at when it comes to looking at a business is the risk. The key risk associated, what could go wrong? What are the biggest challenges you guys are faced with at the moment, if any, and if what are the ways you are combating those and moving forward?
The biggest risk on the diagnostic business, I would say, is speed. And this is where there's a really tight balance that we need to strike on the investments that we make. So I'll explain it as one of the key questions is always, what's the sensible and right-tuned level of burn, right? How much cash should we invest in pursuing that endeavor? And I think you can, without question, index way too far one way or the other way, and we're looking for the Goldilocks spot.
Yep.
We can underinvest in that significantly, and that will impact speed. And I'd say we'd be at high risk of missing that market opportunity and really defining and winning that category.
And is that timing, that speed, is that also does that come into play when it comes to just regulation changes, or do you think the regulation changes, that they aren't happening too often to the point where it's going to actually impact you?
I'm not seeing any key regulatory risk. Being frank, one of the key parts of the roadmap there ultimately be, as a part of embedding it into standard of care, reimbursement, particularly centered around North America. There's a range of activities that we are working through to de-risk and walk through that path. But I actually see that the bigger risk is not necessarily that component. There's a clear path that we walk through and a journey we go through to demonstrate the clinical utility, ultimately achieve reimbursement with the Medicare administrator, and then ultimately span out into the private pay market, or private payers, I should say. That pathway is well trodden, but there's a whole raft of traps in there. So making sure that we do that well and we de-risk that process and design that in the right way with the right advisors, I feel like we're all over that. And we will share more and more information with shareholders as we walk through that process. The key risk, I think, is getting that balance of investment right. If we underinvested, I think we would be at risk of not defining that category and winning and taking advantage of our first mover and technology leadership advantage. And I'm also incredibly attuned to, and the board is incredibly attuned to, we don't want to be, a US drunken sailor and act like we're, cashed up with a ridiculous level of VC money and just, throwing resources and everything at it to safeguard that speed and winning that market. So really diligently, I think, striking that balance of that investment and speed dynamic to define and unlock the clinical utility of that testing, embed it into standard of care and have continued uptake and referrals going up and to the right, and prove to ourselves that and ultimately the administrators that this should be embedded in standard of care and reimbursed, both in Medicare and in with private payers.
Yeah.
So that's what we've got to work through. It's a very clear map, and we'll continue to update everyone as we walk through that. But volume is going up and to the right, and so we have all of the core underlying components, and we need to be incredibly decisive and quick on our feet to make sure we capture that. On the therapeutic side, the risk is there's drug development, and it's high risk, high reward.
Yeah.
And so those same dynamics that we've just discussed come into play. The first is, I would say, we have a really unique aspect to how we've approached therapeutic development, which I think introduces less risk for an investor. And this is the way that we view it internally. So a typical, and one of our directors and a key backer of the company since day one, Professor Ian Fraser, the inventor of Gardasil, he's deputy chair and chairs our medical advisory board. He explains drug development in his experience as locks and keys. You've either got a target, a lock, and then you've got to find a key that can actually fit in it and execute whatever modulation of that target that you're looking to elicit. Or you've got some novel keys, which you think are interesting, a library of keys quite often, and then you want to screen and see whether I can hit an interesting target that we already know is biologically relevant.
Right.
We're actually coming at this in quite a different approach. So there's a whole lot of risk to going through that, because then you find a relevant lock and you find a key that matches it, but you don't know if that key is going to go all over the place and hit a range of other locks and be off target, and the key is going to be unsafe. And we have discovered these therapies by first looking at large human data sets. So it's not done in that we call hit to lead type screening approach. We've actually just observed healthy people and their microbiome. We've observed diseased people And then we found that these are the core different components in the microbiome. And so that, I think, is a significant first level of de-risking, in that what we're trying to do biologically is replicate what we've already seen in that human data. So we're trying to take someone with a disease profile that's missing this part of their microbiome and reintroduce it so that they look like the healthy person.
Right.
And then the second component is they're naturally derived from healthy people. And that hasn't stopped us from doing all of your safety preclinical work, but everything points to these drugs being incredibly safe and well tolerated, which means that we can dose them in a very high level, and we can layer them most likely on top of standard of care, which also helps with the design and execution of our clinical studies. If you're going to wash out standard of care, and then that makes it harder in recruitment. And so being able to layer these on top of standard of care can reduce the barrier to entry and recruitment, and reduce the cost of trial.
Excellent. Well, look, there's a lot going on by the sound of it. Obviously, both sides of the business. Great financial year last year, or fiscal year. This year, there's a lot going on as well. Phase 2 clinical trials. I just want to again thank you for your time. Sorry. And is there any last points you want to make before we end it off there? I think we've gone through a few things, and there's a lot of key insights there. But is there any last things you want to make and make a point to?
I'd say first, thanks, Harry, for this discussion. It was great. I'll just end by saying I think last year was a really defining year for the company. We're either going to get to the clinical utility of our testing and really start to see uptake with healthcare professionals, or not. And we were either going to show that we had the capability to actually stand up and discover and develop these novel drugs, or not. And we've been able to answer both of those questions with yes and yes. And so really, the challenges that we face from here, we've done significant de-risking, and the market opportunity for both of those is huge. As I said earlier, if we even have a fraction of success in one of those endeavors, shareholders will be very, very rewarded. And that's why we have some fantastic top-tier institutions on our register, and some really fantastic long-term shareholders that have been on this journey and continue to stay on the Microba journey as we unlock that. And so I very much, I think it's an incredible opportunity to come into Microba now and double down and come on the journey with us, because it's game time now. We are full speed ahead on driving forward the commercial activities to embed that testing into standard of care guidelines and walk that road of reimbursement in a very diligent and fiscally responsible manner, and unlock those therapeutic opportunities. And if we succeed, the Merck type transaction opportunity is real. There's been more of those. And so super exciting. The team are moving at lightning pace, and we've got some world-class talent, which I'm very proud that we've attracted into the company to do this. And we're very passionate about the impact that we're already having on patients every day, every week, and the impact that lays ahead as we drive towards what's our key North Star metric of impacting 1 million people. And we're rocketing ahead on that front.
I can just imagine how excited everyone is behind the scenes with everything going on, and the outlook moving forward. And like you said, if either one of the aspects pull off, shareholders will be extremely happy is probably the simple word, right? They're not going to be complaining, that's for sure. But I'm excited to watch the journey, watch the growth. But again, Luke, I just want to thank you for coming on here, doing a little bit of an interaction with myself, a bit of an interview. But if anyone there that is watching, join later or anything like that, it is recorded, so it'll be on our YouTube channel. I'm sure Luke will put it on a few of his socials, like LinkedIn or something like that. Feel free to reach out to ShareWise. We're just in Sydney. We're more than happy to have a conversation with anyone who has any questions. But again, Luke, have a lovely, lovely afternoon. And it's been a pleasure to have another ShareWise webinar.
Thank you, Harry. Appreciate you taking the time.
No worries. Talk soon.